What if the way you were told to live your life in order to have spiritual health was actually affecting your mental health and making you mentally unwell? I'm here to argue that the Jehovah's Witness lifestyle actually instills mental illness in its members, and I'm going to show you how. I'm a psychologist and a former Jehovah's Witness. Stick around and see what it says. Now, this video isn't about attacking Jehovah's Witnesses. I have family members who are Jehovah's Witnesses, and I used to be one myself. I know what it's like to be in that lifestyle. Let me say very clearly from the off point, I love Jehovah's Witnesses, okay? And that's the reason why I make these videos and this content, and why I studied psychology in the first place. When you study psychology in university or college, one of the first things they teach you is called the Biopsychosocial Model. And it works like this. Your biology affects your psychology affects your social environment, and your social environment affects your biology. And they all have an interconnecting way of influencing each other. So if you change your biology, it will affect the other two. If you affect your social scene, it'll affect the other two. If you affect your physiology, it'll affect the other two. And it's actually used in psychology and psychotherapy to help people recover from mental illness or manage their mental ill health. Now, unfortunately, the Jehovah's Witness lifestyle and doctrine affects all three. It affects their social scene, especially, and that in turn affects their physiology, and it affects their biology, which I'll get to in a moment. And this creates the perfect cocktail for anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. The first one I want to talk about is this idea that Jehovah's Witnesses are constantly waiting for Armageddon, constantly waiting for the Great Tribulation, for Jehovah to step in and destroy the wicked. And so that there's no real point getting involved in the real world, or the world as they call it, because it's all going to be destroyed at some point anyway. And what this does, if you're constantly waiting for Armageddon, constantly waiting for any second now God might step in and destroy everything, that creates a sense of anxiety, because remember, you don't know whether you're even going to survive that. And secondly, you don't know if your friends and family are going to survive that, and you never know whether you're doing enough and whether God is pleased with you. So this constantly waiting for Armageddon, which never comes, constantly living on the edge, keeps you in a state of anxiety. And when you're living in a high state of anxiety, this raises the level of cortisol in your blood, which affects your biology. So there we have the psychology side, what your beliefs affect your biology, raising the level of cortisol in your blood, which of course affects your brain as well. So you're never fully relaxed as a Jehovah's Witness. You're always on even a subtle state of alert, which isn't healthy. The next one I want to talk about is the social side, social isolation. Now, especially if you're raised a Jehovah's Witness, you're taught that non-members, or worldly people as they call them, are bad association. And what this does is, by only associating with Jehovah's Witnesses, this cuts you off from the real world, from having other perspectives and other worldviews. And it also instills judgmental thinking, black and white thinking, us versus them. And also, the friendships that you do make in a congregation are quite shallow, because those friendships aren't actually real friendships. They're based on being a member of the same religion. And it's very, very common for those friendships to be completely severed if one member leaves the organization or is disfellowshipped. And let's not forget that Jehovah's Witnesses are constantly reporting each other, watching each other, and reporting each other to the elders. Now, I know that this is done because of the idea of blood guilt. The fact that if I know somebody is doing something and I don't report it, then I'm responsible as well, and I can die in Armageddon. So again, we have that state of anxiety, even in the social setting. And this is even worse for people who've been disfellowshipped. People who are disfellowshipped who still want to be a Jehovah's Witness and so attend meetings still on the receiving end of social isolation. They're not allowed to associate with that person. They're not allowed to talk to that person. I know they are allowed to say a simple hello now in the congregation, but that's hardly worth anything, because what the person needs is more love and less judgment. And if they really do care about the person, they need to be looked after. Now, I will say that if you're born and raised a Jehovah's Witness especially, you will end up to be socially stunted. You won't know how to engage properly in the real world, and people might think you're a little bit weird. That's quite common, because you're only associated with Jehovah's Witnesses and you're living in an echo chamber where you don't hear other ideas. Another thing is that being a Jehovah's Witness seriously erodes your self-esteem. Remember that the Jehovah's Witness organization tells the members that they are dust and not worthy by default, and that you need to worship God in order to be acceptable, that you need to be a Jehovah's Witness especially in order to worship God correctly. And it's a very performance-based religion. You have to be seen to be doing things, meeting attendance, ministry, giving talks, answering up, attending conventions, attending assemblies. It's a very performance-based religion. They want to see you doing things. And when you fail to live up to that, for whatever reason, that instills a guilt and self-loathing. Then it makes your self-esteem even worse. In fact, your self-esteem is based on what the organization thinks of you, and if the organization thinks that you're spiritual enough. And as a result, you end up wearing a spiritual mask, hiding your vulnerabilities, hiding your doubts, hiding your guilt in order to appear to be spiritual to everybody else. And everybody else in the congregation is doing the same thing. So living the Jehovah's Witness lifestyle, and you know that you're supposed to be spiritual, and you're supposed to be doing all these things, you're supposed to enjoy ministry, you're supposed to enjoy meeting attendance, but deep down you really don't. That creates a fragmentation of yourself. And as a result, you don't know who you really are. And this is a problem that people have when they leave the organization. They don't know who they are. They spend years and years and years trying to figure out what that is. Some of them even return to the organization just to have the sense of stability. And this feeling inside of not knowing who you are, feeling dependent on the organization, is the perfect breeding grounds for anxiety and depression, and especially low self-worth. Being a Jehovah's Witness also instills learned helplessness. You become dependent on the organization for your decision makings, medical decisions, who you're allowed to talk to, who you're allowed to associate with, what kind of career you're allowed to have, what kind of hobbies you can have, who you can marry. And because you're told that the world is wicked, you don't really get involved in anything outside the Jehovah's Witness organization. You might put off having a career. For a long time, people put off attending university. Plenty of people put off having children and raising a family because they believe that Armageddon is just around the corner. And what this does, it results in what's called an arrested development, where when you grow up, you might get to 50, 60, 70 years of age and realize that you have no retirement savings, you have no family. And those who leave the organization suddenly discover that they find it difficult to make decisions for themselves because they're so used to being dependent on an organization to make their decisions for them. They don't trust themselves to make healthy decisions. As a result, unfortunately, some people either go back to the organization, or they get involved in another high control group, or they get involved in a high control relationship. That's the danger, which why recovery is really, really important. And Jehovah's Witnesses don't really live in the present moment. They're constantly putting off things for the new system. They can travel in the new system. They can have children in the new system. They'll be happy in the new system. And as a result, they don't really focus on their happiness here and now. In fact, I remember when I was a Jehovah's Witness, trying to be happy in the world was considered foolish because the world is so-called wicked, the world is passing away. This trains the brain to delay gratification. When people leave the organization, they realize that Armageddon didn't come and isn't going to. They suddenly end up in an existential crisis. They don't know who they are. They have no purpose in their life, or they don't think they do. And they wonder, what's the point? Now, I actually don't think that's a bad thing. In psychology, we would call that a transitional moment. This is a very, very important step where you suddenly start to realize, hang on, who am I? I don't know who that is. And that is a perfect moment to start your life and to ask questions and speak to people like me or other psychologists, and we can help you to unbox these thoughts and process them, because essentially the meaning of your life is whatever you want to give it. Existentialism is a whole subject we can talk about. I'll do that in another video. But if you don't know who you are, you don't know what you want, that's a time of self-discovery, and that's the perfect time to go out there and collect experiences, figure out what you like and what you don't like. You won't find that in the Jehovah's Witnesses, though. Jehovah's Witnesses give you a purpose, knocking on doors, peddling magazines, and they give you a hope, and only a hope, of the new system. They give you conditional friends. They give you family members who would disown you if you left the organization, and that's not healthy. Being a Jehovah's Witness also results in emotional suppression. Your guilts, your doubts, your vulnerabilities, you're not really allowed to voice them. You're certainly not. Certainly there's a worry that if you were to confide in an elder that you don't believe the organization, or you don't believe that your interpretation of the Bible is correct. I remember feeling guilty, feeling that. And the worry is, if you confide in the elders, they can disfellowship you for thinking that. So that this fear that people have, and they don't reach out and talk about it. And they don't realize that plenty of other Jehovah's Witnesses in their congregation have those same thoughts. They think they're the only one. Now, living in that state keeps the body in a state of tension. And what I said about the psychology affects your biology and physiology, and these can manifest themselves in somatic symptoms. So, for example, when I was a Jehovah's Witness, I remember all through my youth, I used to get blisters on my hands. I can't remember what the term's called, but I'd have, it's like bubbles and they'd burst, right? I had that for 20 years from childhood, and I thought it was a skin condition, and I get like topical creams and things that would kind of keep it at bay. And then I started to develop tics as well. I'd constantly talk to myself in my head, like to God, and sit in a loop over and over again, or I'd make coughing sounds. Those things stopped when I stopped reading the literature, or when I stopped attending meetings. Those things were happening because my body was in a state of stress. My brain knew something was wrong. My body didn't know what that was and was responding in another way. I know people who've had OCD and had Tourette's syndrome and nervous tics and would develop nausea just walking into a Kingdom Hall. Those are symptoms that your brain knows something is wrong. Your body is responding to that. That is a sign that your mental distress is trying to manifest itself. It really needs to get out, right? That's when you need to start talking about it. But at the very least, start writing it down, journaling about it. You need to get this out of you. The guilt, the depression, the anxiety, the thoughts. Get your thoughts out there, add it on paper, or talk about it to someone you trust, not to Jehovah's Witness, because they will be required to report you. So how do you fix this? Well, the first thing you need to do is to recalibrate all three systems: biological, psychological, and social. Now, whether you're still a Jehovah's Witness or you're not a Jehovah's Witness, you still can get relief from these things. It's easier if you're no longer reading the literature. It's easier if you're no longer attending meetings, because the more you read the literature and attend the meetings, the more it normalizes that doctrine. So let's take the biological side first. What can you do? Well, the first thing you can do is start getting more regular sleep. Make sure you get at least 8 hours. Pay attention to your diet. Try and eat well. Try to exercise if you can. 15 minutes, half an hour a day is fine. And try to practice mindful meditation. I know the Watchtower Society probably wouldn't approve of that, but it's actually very beneficial, and it's used in psychotherapy, proven to be effective. The psychological side. Well, journaling is very helpful. I'd absolutely recommend that. If you can talk to a therapist, that's definitely worth doing as well. I would say don't confide in a Jehovah's Witness, because they will report you. They will feel like they need to. And then secondly, try to be more compassionate towards yourself. Don't be too judgmental. Imagine if a friend told you the things that you were feeling about themselves. What would you say to them? Because they're the things that you need to say to yourself. And finally, the social side. You need to start making friends with people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, contrary to what the Watchtower Society will tell you, not all non-Jehovah's Witnesses are bad. In fact, I've found most people in the real world are just like you and me. But plenty of them are nicer than plenty of Jehovah's Witnesses. The people you see in the Jehovah's Witnesses who are good people would be good people if they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. And the people in the real world who are good people wouldn't be any better or worse if they were Jehovah's Witnesses. It doesn't make a difference. Make friends with non-members, or even connect with former Jehovah's Witnesses or fellow Jehovah's Witnesses with doubts on exJW Reddit. You haven't got to use your real name. You can talk openly on there. There's lots of people on there who can support you. So healing from all this isn't just not believing the doctrine or not attending meetings. It involves reconstructing your identity. It sounds like a long process, and it can be, but it's also very, very enjoyable. I enjoyed my process of recovery. I've had the best years of my life, and you will too. It does get better from here. So if you were to meet somebody with depression and anxiety, for example, the symptoms that they would manifest would be things like low self-worth, not living in the present moment. So being a Jehovah's Witness and listening to the doctrine and obeying the governing body makes people behave as if they're mentally ill. They put off their future. They don't focus on the present moment. They promote dependency on the organization. They promote dependency on the governing body. The constant judgmental attitudes, the watching of other people, the anxiety that they feel waiting for Armageddon. These are all symptoms of mental illness. And if you start to take on this lifestyle and start behaving this way, this makes you mentally ill. And if you carry on reading the literature and you carry on attending the meetings, you're keeping yourself in that loop. When you break away from that, that's when you have a time to heal. That's when you start to realize, hey, something isn't right. And we saw this happen over lockdown. When Jehovah's Witnesses couldn't attend meetings anymore, that cycle was broken. I know there was online meetings, but people were able to log in and turn the camera off and not really pay attention. And lots of people left the organization during COVID lockdown because they were suddenly allowed off the treadmill for a moment and were allowed to think. I hope this video has been helpful. I will be making more of them in the near future. My website is still under construction, x-jwrecovery.com. Check it out.